31 years ago, Ferdinand Edralin Marcos died in Honolulu. Ang nangyari kasi ay February 25 nung sila ay nagkaroon ng gulo dito sa EDSA at pagkatapos sila ay lumikas ng Pilipinas. Tumira sila sa Honolulu at doon sila ang tinatawag nga, they were there in exile. Sa madaling salita, nagkasakit siya doon o kung ano man yung kanyang karamdaman ay lumala ito dahil sa panahon at dahil na rin sa bigat ng kanyang dinadala na mga suliranin, hindi sariling suliranin, ngunit sa lahat ng nangyayari dito sa ating bayan. At ganoon na rin sa kinabukasan nila bilang isang pamilya na sa kasalukuyang andun sila, hindi niya nalalaman kung saan patungo. It was very difficult even to look beyond Honolulu because that was a situation where they could not understand where the future would be insofar as the family was concerned. Over time, President Marcos has instructed several of his lawyer friends here in the Philippines to petition the highest court of our land, the Supreme Court, petitioning for his return to the Philippines. Sapagkat doon sa Honolulu at pagkatapos sa ibang lugar pa sa Amerika, alam niya na siya ay lilitisin. Ngunit ang sabi nga niya, kailangan ay sa harap ng taong bayan. Dito sa atin siya kailangan tumayo upang kanyang defensahan so that he can defend himself before our people, before our courts. Tandaan ninyo na nung pumasok si Corazon Aquino, ay pinalitan niya ang ating mga nasa judiciary, sa Supreme Court, sa Court of Appeals. Marami rin siyang mga tinanggal na mga elected officials, alam na rin natin yan. Naglagay siya ng kanyang mga tinatawag na officers in charge. At sa mga ibang mga offices ng ating gobyerno, kahit na sila ay civil service eligibles at meron silang tinatawag ng security of tenure, kung sila ay merong silang suspetsya na malapit kay Marcos ito o kaya si Marcos na nag-appoint, lahat sila tinanggal. Yun ang nangyari dito sa kasalukuyan sa Pilipinas at nalungkot nga si President Marcos na bakit kinailangan gawin yon, sapagkat alam naman niya na yung mga taong kinuha niya, lalo na sa kabinete, were the best qualified for the positions that they held. Anyway, that was the situation. Nung una silang dumating sa Honolulu, doon muna sila tinira sa tinatawag na Hicam Air Base. Tandaan ninyo yung air base na yan, doon sa Honolulu, naalala nyo nung gera sa Pearl Harbor, binomba yung mga bases nila dyan sa Honolulu. Doon sa Hicam Air Base, doon muna tinalaga sila President Marcos. Tandaan ninyo na sila ay kinuha sa Clark Air Base, magmula sa Malacanang, dinala muna sila sa Clark Air Base. Pagkatapos, ang buong akala ni President Marcos ay dadalhin sila sa Paway, sapagkat yun ang kanyang sinabi doon sa isang opisyal ng Washington, si Senator Paul Laxalt. That is exactly what even Senator Paul Laxalt wrote about this. President Marcos believed that he was going to be brought to his home province in Ilocos Norte, which was in Paway. Anyway, ang nangyari sa Clark Air Base, dinala sila sa Guam. Hindi sila nagtagal doon, sinakay din sila sa isang eroplanong malaki at sila ay dinala sa Honolulu. Kaya yan nga sinasabi ko, pagdating sa Hicam Air Base, sila ay dinala sa quarters ng commander ng base na yon. Sa makatuwid, parang kalahati ng building na yon, it's actually just a one-story building lang yan. Kalahati ng building na yan ay yung base commander nakatira at doon sa kalahati si President Marcos at si Imelda Romualdez Marcos. Doon sila pinatulog muna ng ewan ko kung ilang buwan yun. Ngunit yung mga ibang kasamahan nila, meron namang ibang quarters doon sa base na yan, doon sila pinatulog, doon sila nilagay. Doon sa Hicam Air Base, kwento nga sa akin ni Mrs. Marcos, naglagay ang mga sundalo, ang officials ng Amerika doon sa base na yan. Tandaan ninyo, this is an American military base. So is it not guarded by military people and soldiers, etc.? Ngunit naglagay sila ng parang perimeter parang harang. They placed a yellow cord in front of the quarters where President and Mrs. Marcos were staying. Parang yung do not cross this line or whatever, para sila President Marcos hindi makalabas, na hindi hihingi ng permiso na makalabas sila. Ganon din, kung pero nais bumisita sa kanila, kailangan magre-register bago sila makapasok. Naglagay ng parang perimeter na yellow cord. Yun ang ginawa sa kanila. At pinagbawalan din sila na makipag-contact kahit kanino. Ngunit pinayagan din naman si Mrs. Marcos na tumawag sa telepono. Nakatawag siya sa Pilipinas, at nung nakausap ko siya, nung unang sinabi niya, andito kami sa Hikam, at nagmamadali siya magsalita, sabi niya na kontakin ko daw yung kanyang mga kaibigan, yung akala niya na mga best friends niya, na mga blue ladies, sapagkat kung meron silang paraan na magpadala ng dollars doon sa kanila, kailangan daw niya pambili ng gatas ng kanyang mga apo na kasama nila doon, sapagkat doon sa commissary sa base, kailangan ay dollars, syempre ang ibabayad. Ang sabi nga niya na kung ano man yung natira niya na dollars na bit-bit niya, ay nabigay niya daw kay Danding Cojuangco para meron din silang pambili na kung ano man kanilang kailangan dun sa commissary dun sa base. At any rate, ang unang pangalan na binanggit ni Mrs. Marcos, may her soul rest in peace, yung kanyang kaibigan, si Imelda Cojuangco. Si Imelda Cojuangco ang kanyang pinatawagan. Wala naman akong numero ng kanyang mga kaibigan. Kaya kinontak ko si Ismael Matay, si Mel Matay, yung Deputy Minister ni Mrs. Marcos sa Ministry of Human Settlements. At sabi ko, may telepono ka ba ng mga kaibigan ni Mrs. Marcos, sapagkat nais niyang tawagan ko sila upang makatulong, makapagpadala ng dollars doon sa Honolulu. Ang sabi sa akin ni Mel Matay, kalimutan mo na yan. Kalimutan mo na yung mga Marcoses, ang sabi niya. Andun na sila sa Hawaii, hayaan mo na sila. Sa madaling salita, wala ako na contact sa kanyang mga kaibigan sapagkat wala naman ako mga numero ng mga ito. Pero hindi alam ni Mrs. Marcos marahil na yung mga kaibigan niya ay sumama na kay Cory Aquino. Yun na nga ang nangyari, kaagad-kaagad. Hindi pa nga nakakaupo si Mrs. Aquino ay nakadikit na yung kanyang mga kaibigan. Yung inaakala niyang matatalik na kaibigan niya sapagkat hindi lang sa haba ng 20 years na sila ay nasa Malacanang, nakasama niya itong mga babaeng ito, kasama niya sa mga biyahe, sa lahat ng mga ibang okasyon. Ngunit, bago pa tumakbo ng pagka-presidente si President Marcos, mga kaibigan na yan, kapitbahay nga niya yung isa. Anyway, that was what happened. So they stayed at that base commander's residence until they were able to move out from there, at sila ay binigyan ng tirahan dun sa highway sa Honolulu. Alam niyo kung nakapunta kayo sa Honolulu, parang iisang highway lang talaga yan eh. Kalanianiole, yun ang pangalan. That is the Hawaiian name of that long highway, Kalanianiole. At yan ang umiikot sa buong isla ng Oahu, kung saan andun ang Honolulu. So merong isang parang bungalow, at doon pinalipat si President and Mrs. Marcos doon sa bungalow na yon, katabi ng Kalaniole Highway. Kaya lahat ng mga dumadaan ng mga sasakyan nadidinig nila sa kanilang bahay, sapagkat yun na nga, nasa tabi lang ng highway. Tandaan ninyo na maliit lang yung lugar ng Honolulu kung talagang tutuusin. Kaya kalahating araw lang yata o just a couple of hours, maiikot mo na yung buong island na yon. Nung sila ay nakatira doon, ito kailangan siguro sabihin natin, sapagkat walang nagsasabi nito, hindi ito lumalabas sa kahit na anong dyaryo, hindi naman ito napag-uusapan din kahit saan man sa radyo. Ngunit tinatapunan sila ng basura ng mga tao doon. Can you imagine that? Tinatapunan yung kanilang bakuran, tinatapunan sila ng basura. Ganong kalupit ang unang trato sa kanila doon sa bungalow na tinirahan nila, hanggang sa naayos nila, sapagkat meron dalawang bahay si Mrs. President and Mrs. Marcos doon sa tinatawag ng Makiki Heights. Dalawang bahay ito, hindi naman to gaanong kalaki, ngunit maganda yung lokasyon, sapagkat doon sa Makiki Heights, makikita mo, matatanaw mo yung Honolulu, makikita mo yung Waikiki Beach, makikita mo yung mga buildings, lahat doon. Doon sila nalipat galing sa Kalanianiole. Ilang buwan silang andon, tapos nalipat sila doon sa sarili na nilang bahay sa Honolulu. Pinayagan naman sila. tandaan ninyo, nang dumating sila doon, kagaya ng nabanggit ko na ilang beses, ay kinuha lahat ng kanilang mga dokumento na dala nila. Kung ano man pa yung natitirang dokumento na nabitbit nila galing sa Malacanang. Kinonfiscate lahat yon. At kung meron pa silang nakita mga isip nila ay objects of medyo mamahalin, kinuha din lahat yon. Ganon din ang ginawa sa lahat ng kanilang kasamahan. Yung kanilang mga security aid, yung kanilang mga kahit na sino nakasama nila, pag may makita na relo halimbawa na medyo mamahalin, kinonfiscate lahat yon. Sa madaling salita, nung lumipat sila doon sa kanilang tirahan, halos ang nadala lang nila na gamit, damit man o ano man na pambihis, yun lang nabitbit nila sa kanilang pag-alis sa Malacanang. Maraming mga Ilocano na matagal nang nagsettle sa Honolulu. Kaya sila na rin ang nagtungo sa bahay kung natinitirahan ni President Marcos at nag-donate sila. Ang dami nagdala ng mga kinakailangan sa bahay, mga lahat ng sa pantry, mga canned goods, mga pagkain, mga toiletries, nagdala sila ng mga tsinelas, mga sapatos, mga pajama, lahat na maisip nila na gagamitin ng isang walang halos na dalang mga kagamitan, nagbigay yung mga Ilocano doon sa Honolulu. At madalas din silang nagtutungo doon para pasayahin naman ang ating dating Pangulo na nakatira sila doon sa Makiki Heights. Kaya tuwing linggo, merong merong social event doon. May nagmimisa doon, kaya marami nagsisidatingan. At dala din nila yung mga pagkain na sila na rin ang makikisalo-salo. Most of these are Ilocano dishes. Of course, they know that that was what the president would want to have, especially there. So, natuwa naman siya. And it was enough at least to console him, the fact that he was settling there as a, ano bang tawag dito? Parang in exile, ngunit yung sa kanyang parole visa, ang nakasulat doon ay, may copy ako dito nakasulat doon ay, ang purpose ng kanyang pagtungo sa Honolulu, yung kanyang pagdating doon, kasi merong immigration card yan, ay ang sabi doon, public interest. At ang nakalagay doon sa Hawaii, naglanding sila doon at pagkatapos ay may parole visa sila. Kaya ito yung itsura noon. Kung makikita ninyo, ito sa baba, ganyan yung parole visa na binigay kay President Marcos. Yun ang pinakita din niya sa akin ito. Sabi nga niya na, after being a friend of 5 American presidents and being president of your own country, this is all they gave me. At yan, kinakailangan ay magre-report siya. Araw-araw silang dalawa, hindi naman araw-araw, every month I think or every week, regularly, silang dalawa ni Mrs. Marcos magre-report sa Immigration Bureau hanggang sa yung mga abogado na mismo nagsabi na hindi naman kailangan sigurong physically na sila pa ang pupunta mismo sa Immigration Office. Ngunit yan ay nire-renew nila sapagkat yung kanilang parole visa originally hanggang hanggang September 1987, so halos isang taon lang magmula nung dumating sila nung February o ilang buwan lang. Pagkatapos nire-renew na lang yan kung kailan gusto ng immigration officer na i-renew. Ngunit meron silang instructions na hindi sila pwedeng lumabas ng Honolulu at all. Hindi rin silang pwedeng pumunta na kahit saan lugar sa Amerika. At lalong-lalo na hindi sila pwedeng sumakay ng barko o ng eroplano para bumalik sa Pilipinas. So meron silang restrictions tungkol dyan. Can you imagine that? A former president of a sovereign independent republic is confined there in Honolulu and prevented from moving anywhere other than the place where he is presently staying. Doon nga sa tinatawag nating Makiki Heights. So yun ang nangyari sa haba ng panahon na andun sila, 1986, 87, 88, hanggang sa umabot na nga nung lumala na yung karamdaman ni President Marcos. Ito na yung 1989. Sa September 28, doon na siya that is where he finally rested in peace. But prior to that, he was in and out of the hospital already. And there were many occasions when after coming out of ICU and moving to a regular ward, he was already feeling very well. Kaya nga sabi ni President Marcos noon, oh, okay na ako, balik na ulit sa Makiki Heights. So he was in and out actually for that period. Naalala natin na halimbawa, nung magbe-birthday si Mrs. Marcos, medyo lumalala na yung sakit ni President Marcos. Sabi niya, nagdadasal siya. Sabi niya, naku po, sana makaabot na sa birthday ko. So that was July 2. Nakaabot naman sa birthday niya. Tapos gumaling ulit. Balik na naman sa Makiki Heights. So it was a roller coaster ride as far as his health was concerned. Until medyo lumala na nga ito nung bandang September. Noong September, sabi nga ni Mrs. Marcos, dasal ulit siya. At dasal din siya sa Panginoon. At sa lahat siguro ng mga santo. At kinakausap din niya si President Marcos. Magpagaling ka ha para umabot ka sa birthday mo. So umabot nga. Hanggang sa pagbalik na naman ulit sa ospital, lumalanan talaga. At inabutan na siya ng kamatayan itong September 28, 1989. So maliban doon, karamihan nga ng mga dating bumibisita sa kanyang mga Ilocano at taga doon sa Honolulu, nagkaroon sila ng parang prayer vigil doon sa ospital. Doon sila sa grounds, kung saan man lugar na sa harapan o sa tabi ng ospital na merong open grounds, di na sila umalis doon, nagsisindi sila ng kandila. Nagkaroon sila ng parang tinatawag na prayer vigil. At dito naman sa Pilipinas, yung mga tinatawag na Marcos loyalists, ganun din ang ginawa. Nagkaroon din sila ng mga candle vigils, pagdadasal, para sana lumakas pa si President Marcos at makauwi. So, mangyari diyan ay nagpetition nga sa Supreme Court ulit ang mga abogado ni President Marcos, kasama din ng kanyang asawa at mga anak. Nagpetition sila sa ating Supreme Court dito sa Pilipinas na kung maaari, pauwi na. Kasi mukhang mamamatay na nga, malapit na nga. O kung sabihin na hindi naman sa sinasabi naghihingalo na, ngunit kaya pang magbiyahe sa kanyang kondisyon. Pero it will be an ambulance plane. Makauwi lang at dito na sana mamatay dito sa kanyang place of birth. To die here in his home country. That was denied. In fact, I will quote to you the brutality and the ugliness of the way they replied to the petition of President Marcos to the Supreme Court. The Solicitor General at the time was the late Francisco Chavez. Siya yung abogado ni Mrs. Aquino. Do you know what he said? Marami siyang sinabing sagot sa mga abogado niya, abogado ni President Marcos. Ngunit ang pinaka-pangit, the most horrendous reply that he said, that he wrote, actually, this is written in his reply to the Supreme Court, not to allow President Marcos to return to his country of origin, to his homeland, to his place of birth. And this is what he said, this is what he wrote. To bring Marcos back to the Philippines is like bringing a dog back to his vomit. Masakit, hindi po ba? I have to repeat that because I have not come across any such language from any decent person, no matter how much rage or anger you have against another personality. And this is a former president of the Republic of the Philippines. Walang respeto. Talagang bastos, kung sasabihin natin, ang pagkasulat nun. And this is coming from the lawyer of Corazon Aquino. That is how he replied to the Supreme Court. Not to make him return to the Philippines even though he was already dying. And even his dying breath, baka sakali daw mag-rally pa ang mga tao at magkaroon pa ulit ng gulo dito sa Pilipinas. Can you imagine that? But the most painful way of his expressing the thinking, the feeling, and the rule of Mrs. Aquino was to bring Marcos back to the Philippines. It's like bringing a dog back to his vomit. Di ba napakasakit nun? Napakasakit, ngunit para sa kanila, ito ay bumabalik sa kanila. Because that is a reflection of the kind of mind, the kind of heart, and the kind of conscience that these people have. Kaya kung ngayon may nararamdaman kayo sa kasalukuyan na mga taong nagsasalita laban pa rin kay Marcos, 31 years after his death, yan ang kanilang kalibre. That is the caliber of their thinking, of their heart, and of their mind, and of their conscience. So, huwag kayong mabahala kung hanggang sa kasalukuyan ganyan pa rin sa magsalita. Yan ang pinanggalingan noong 1986. At sinasabi nga nila na why are we trying to revise history Anong revision ng history ang ginagawa ng mga nagsasalita tungkol kay President Marcos? Do they have a monopoly of history? Do they have a monopoly of the time of 20 years of President Marcos? And if there is a review of history, why is it that they would call it a revisionist kind of a review? History is always revisionist talaga. Kung tutuusin, if you're going to be very objective about it. People who write history are usually the victors, the winners, yung mga mayroong umaabot sila sa kanilang entitlement that since we won, either in a revolution or in a coup or in a mutiny, or if they are in power after a regime that they hated, that they disliked, that they overthrew, then they feel that they are the demigods and they can say anything. Sila ang nagre-revise ng history kung tutuusin. And so we come to that point exactly what I'm asking. Ano ba talagang ibig sabihin ng mga taong nagsasalita tungkol kay President Marcos? They just express exactly how they felt during that time. It is not revising history. It is merely the statement of how people felt during that time, how they believed in President Marcos, how it was that they considered him a hero enough to be buried sa libingan ng mga bayani, and how up to this day, our country is still, sadly, still tilting towards those who actually voted for President Marcos, all of them in 1986 elections, and then 1986 elections, February 7, and then all of those have continued to still, cast their invectives against the Marcoses. And so on the anniversary of President Marcos's death, 31 years thereafter, this eulogy was never published. It was never presented on radio or on television or in social media or anywhere else. But it was recited there where they temporarily laid to rest President Marcos, not burying him, but in a refrigerated place so that he can be brought back to the Philippines when there is already the approval for him to return to our country. So iniwan siya doon, nilagay siya doon upang hintayin ang kanyang pagbabalik dito sa ating bansa. But on the day of his internment there, in a way, there was a gathering of all the thousands of people there in Hawaii who attended the services. There was a piano even that they installed there, so they had some music. Some people from the Philippines also came. Mrs. Cristina Ponce Enrile was there. Mrs. Leticia Hani was there, the sister of Fidel Ramos. At marami pang iba, yung mga general, the generals of the 4 major divisions of the armed forces, except the Philippine Constabulary General Fidel Castro. But all the rest were there. You had General Pixio, General Admiral Alejandro, General Ramos, they were there, and the other officials of the military, together with those executive officers in the executive department of President Marcos, yung mga walang mga kaso at yung mga hindi nasa hold order, nakapunta sa Honolulu para dun sa occasion na yon. At binasa nila yung sulat ni Aimee, sapagkat si Aimee ang unang-unang lumikas sa Honolulu, kung saan-saan napadpad yung bata, yung panganay na anak ni President Marcos. First, she was in Morocco under the courtesy and the accommodations and the hospitality of the King of Morocco, King Hassan II. And then from there, sapagkat parang hinahabol siya ng mga FBI, mga CIA, mga Interpol, lahat ng yan, she had to transfer again. She was moving from one place to the other until she finally settled eventually in Portugal, where also the president's brother-in-law, Bejo Romualdez, is also settled. Anyway, binasa yung sulat ng kanyang panganay na anak addressed to her father. Yung kanyang bunsong anak ang nagbasa nito at umawit din. At yung kanyang isang anak din, yung si Miss Aimee, meron din siyang binasa sa kanyang ama, kay President Marcos, ang kanyang tinuturing na ama. At yung kanyang kaisa-isang anak na lalaki, yung ating sanang Vice President sa kasalukuyan, ngunit nakapending pa yung kanyang kaso sa Supreme Court, Ferdinand Marcos II, he delivered his eulogy to his father. And on the occasion of the 31st anniversary of the death of Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, I would like to read the eulogy of his son, Bongbong Marcos. And the title of his eulogy is A Man's Farewell to His Father. It is in the nature of moments such as this that one picks out particular incidents of a loved one, particular memories that serve to illustrate the relationship between two people. This is rather difficult when it comes to my father, not because I know him so little, but because I knew him so well. And when I think on it, all our time together was uplifting, enlightening, and enriching. Digging deep into my past, the earliest memory I have of my father was of him in his office in our home in San Juan. I remember him receiving callers for hours on end, giving and receiving advice, writing the ubiquitous recommendations, while his small son played with his feet under the desk. It was a gentler time. Then there was that birthday morning, it must have been my 5th, also in San Juan, when he woke me up singing "Happy Birthday" and presented me with my birthday present. He showed me how it worked and played with me, but I could hear the assistants coming in telling him that he would be late for an appointment. But he stayed on, obviously enjoying himself as much as I, until he could stay no more. He did not want to leave, and I knew that I didn't want him to leave either, but somehow I understood that he had to go. I suddenly realized that he was an important man. I also realized that he was a good father and that I loved him. I will always think of him as this man of unbridled excellence who would gently but firmly push you to your limits in all that you chose to do. I arrived home one day with a particularly good set of grades, impatient for him to see them. Finally, finding him, I said, "Look, Dad, my grades are so high." He took my report card, looked at it, looked at me, and said, "Of course they are. You are a Marcos, and for a Marcos, excellence is a way of life." Seeing my crestfallen expression, he put his arm around me and said, "You have done well, my son, and I know you and I know that you will do even better." He had again made me understand, and I know exactly what he meant. I will always remember him as a warrior poet. I had, as a child, seeing him and his friends practice their shooting, constantly nagged him to teach me, and finally the time came when he began instructing me at the intricacies of marksmanship. Years later, I was pronounced by him to be sufficiently schooled and ready for a hunt. I naturally assured that he would accompany me and guide me through that experience as well. When I discovered that this was not to be so, I asked him why, and he said to me, "I have seen too many killings in my life, and my heart could not bear the thought of even a single death of my hand." And then why, I asked, "Why did you teach me to shoot?" "Not to kill," he answered, "but as you would learn discipline and gain the self-confidence and satisfaction of doing something difficult well." He is to me the tireless academe who, on one of his rare visits out of the country, when he came to see me at Oxford, as I took him around the grounds of my college, he looked in wonderment at the dons and the students walking past with their gowns billowing behind them. He gazed at the glorious sight of Oxford's spires against the sky. I could feel him drinking in the knowledge and the learning that hung inside the thick air. He later asked me, "So, you live and work here?" And grinning, I answered, "Yes, Dad, I do." "You lucky, lucky boy," he said. And for the first time during my stay there, I realized how lucky I was indeed, and what a wondrous gift of learning he had once more given me. He will always be the grand orator who I watched and listened to as he held great crowds spellbound. I can hear his voice ringing in the air. I can see the upturned faces at countless millions as they listened, transfixed by the power of his messages. I remember him too in smaller, more intimate moments, such as on rainy days, taking us children to the airport to resume our studies abroad. He would always tell me what I imagine other parents would tell their children: study hard, be good, and write us as often as possible and tell us what you're doing. Then he would look at the skies and say, "We are so sad that you are leaving that even the heavens weep." And though we laughingly mocked that lamentation of his, we nestled in the warmth of his affection. So you see, he was my hero. He was my general. He was my teacher, my friend. He was my father. The man I have described is a good, kind man who could love with warmth and depth unknown to most men. But there are many kind men and good fathers everywhere. What was it about this man that set him apart? Why was it then that when his heart, shattered into 1,000 pieces by the betrayal of those he loved and trusted, why was it that when that lion heart stopped beating, the deathly, deafening silence was heard across the world? The answer lies in the greatness of the man. His first great test was early. At the age of 19, in the midst of his studies for the bar, he was accused of the crime of murder. Preparing in prison, he was allowed to plead his case before the Supreme Court and won. He was not even a lawyer then. A year later, fulfilling the lifelong ambition, he wrote the bar examinations and scored so well that his excellence could not be believed. He was accused of cheating and confronted with the charge by his examiners. Marcos challenged them to test him at that moment where he stood. And they did. And he prevailed, posting the highest score that was to be recognized and recorded for years to come. As a young man, he answered his country's call to fight for her survival and for her freedom. He fought willingly and he fought well. He fought displaying such courage and such audacity that he was awarded more medals than any soldier in the Pacific Theater. He fought so hard that MacArthur even said, were it not for Ferdinand Marcos, the Philippines would have fallen months earlier. Even then, he was saving Filipinos and American lives. Even then, he was already shaping history. His entry into politics followed by a meteoric rise in the political firmament. His political activity was characterized by the congressman or senator from Ilocos Norte, striking fear in the hearts of his political enemies, no matter how well established or well entrenched. In 1965, he was mandated the presidency, the youngest man to ever hold that position. As president, he transformed a backward feudalistic economic system into a vibrant one. He did this by committing government resources to the most extensive infrastructure development that the country had ever seen, since and after. This included the building of roads, bridges, irrigation systems, power plants. He built schools and hospitals. He created an environment that encouraged the growth of the agricultural sector until finally we achieved self-sufficiency for the first time. He shaped the military from a disorganized, ill-equipped, factionalized collection of soldiers into a strong, well-motivated, viable fighting force. He introduced the idea of the civilian and the citizen soldier and gave the armed forces a place in peaceful society. Just as importantly, he nurtured our need to learn our heritage and our culture. We suddenly learned our true history, not the one written by our colonizers. We discovered the qualities that are innate in our consciousness and where for the first time in our history we became a nation. He gave his countrymen a national identity, and the Philippines could finally take its place in the world. In 1972, with the forces of chaos threatening the safety of our country, he declared martial law, thus shielding us from the clutches of anarchy. He proceeded to disseminate the private armies that threatened peace and order. He decimated the insurgency movement and brought order to the country once more. He then began to build a new society of egalitarianism, where industry and ingenuity could be rewarded. He dreamed of a society where we could all live in peace, where our dreams and ambitions were attainable. He dreamed of a strong and united Philippines, standing proud, showing itself to the world. How close to success he came. But alien forces, unable to understand, too blind to see his vision, soon conspired against him. And on that fateful day, in February 1986, when those alien forces presented him with a choice, kill your countrymen or kill yourself, he remained true and saved his country. So truly we know that he was great. This was the man who wrote to me in the nadir of our existence. While other Filipinos may waver as to what they would be willing to pay for our country and for our country's freedom, we belong to a breed that has never counted the price that we must pay for freedom. You are a true soldier, and our credo has and always will be battle for our country's freedom to the death. But more than death, at the price of even fortune and of the most valuable to a man, honor itself. This is the man we have lost. For soon it came to pass, when they had taken his fortune and his life, he offered up his honor. He did this not because honor was unimportant to him, but because it was the most sacred thing that one could sacrifice. Willingly he gave it up, that his Philippines may not be plunged into the ultimate horror of a civil war. This was the greatness of the man. This was the man that we lost. So go now, O brave, kind, and gentle man. You now have shuffled the dizzying heights where you truly belong. You have shuffled off the mortal coil that, bereft of its weight, you may now rise to the dizzying heights of the heavens. For only amongst the angels and saints and God Almighty Himself can such courage, passion, and nobility such as yours be understood. Excuse me. Dear Father, you gave me the gift of life. I now offer it back to you. This life will continue only to fight for that which we have come to believe, and one day we will stand together before our Master, and He shall smile upon both of us. Till then, we shall grieve no more, for knowing such greatness, we hear God's voice call out to us. You who have sacrificed with him, walk tall, walk proud, with your head held high, for you have fought for the greatest cause any man has known, and you have fought the fight shoulder to shoulder with its greatest champion. You who loved him, family and friends, weep not, for you sat at the feet of a man touched by God. And my motherland, O beloved Philippines, fear not for your future, for His Spirit lives in all of your sons and daughters who would give their lives for you. And though they may kill us, we shall never die. O my God, into your hands we commend this Spirit. And though they may not let his body rest in the land from whence he came, we shall be constant by his side at this interim place until, dear God, you choose to bless him, your faithful servant, with his home. That was the eulogy of Bongbong Marcos in Honolulu, Hawaii, on the 28th of September, 1989. You must excuse my choking, my coughing, my even mispronouncing some words, my running through this with controlled emotion. This is the eulogy of a son to his father. And I would like to repeat this for the sake of all of those who stood by President Marcos. That is exactly what he would want us to remember on this day. And that is precisely what we have to remember likewise, perhaps also for the rest of our lives. The way we try to not review or revisit, but the way we try to have history being written down the way it should. History being announced and said and recorded and spoken of the way it should. Anyway, so it's difficult to be going over it again without having to stammer as I just did. But I wanted to share that eulogy with you of Bongbong Marcos, who's still awaiting the final decision for his victory as Vice President of the Republic of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos II. And so it was that after the death of President Marcos, Mrs. Marcos still had to wait for 1991, almost 3 years, or 4 years even, or even more, 5 years as a matter of fact, before finally she would be able to have the return of the remains of President Marcos brought to Ilocos Norte and there to be interred temporarily until again, after so many presidents, he would be able to be buried at the libingan ng mga bayani. Oh my goodness, what a long journey it was. From February 1986 to his final resting place at the libingan ng mga bayani, where you have all of these other people, a few of them in fact remaining, who would say that they would throw stones at his burial ground, who still would cry out with such anger and such rage of what happened during the period of martial law, as though that were the only things that happened actually during that period. Understandable that their relatives or some of their ancestry may have suffered under the hands of military or police personnel, but Ferdinand Marcos had nothing to do whatsoever by any direct order for the violation of the human rights of these people. And yet they keep on throwing back to him and accusing him of all of this dark period that they suffered from, when during that period we must also look at where the sun was shining, and that was, as I've said, as already mentioned even by the eulogy of his son, and many other people have also acknowledged this. If they are building now or planning to build a monument to remember the atrocities, as they would call it, of human rights violations perpetrated during the Marcos regime, they cannot compete with the monuments of the thousands of roads, thousands of kilometers of roads, of bridges, of ports, of seaports, and all the infrastructure, all the other buildings likewise that were built during this time. there is nothing that they can compare all of those with the one building that they would say should be constructed to honor whom? People who were involved in the overthrow of the Philippine government during the time of President Marcos, when in fact many of them even were not even part of the construction or the development of our country, but they were part of the order of battle. And if in the event that they were maltreated or tortured or even killed during encounters and during the time that they were imprisoned, then, as I've always said, whoever was responsible for them should be the ones that should be accused of those human rights violations, precisely. The policemen, the soldiers, the military, and then even those in their command, higher than them. Because there are actually videos, if you could still source them, on file with Channel 4 perhaps, because all the important meetings that were held in Malacanang between the President and his Joint Chiefs of Staff and the members of the military, they were all recorded. And there's one video there that was very clear, coming from one of those that were recorded, a meeting he had with the commanding generals of the major service commands. And one of them was Fidel Ramos, as a matter of fact, who was the head of the Philippine Constabulary, who was asking President Marcos to sign an order for something to do with the human rights violations that will be undertaken against those that were considered in the order of battle. I do not specifically have the direct quotation, but I will try to source it. But I've seen this several times, even during that time, and some of them have never been recorded and have never been reported, as a matter of fact. So what we're trying to say is, there were those who suffered because of the atrocities of military personnel, police personnel, and so far as the administration of martial law is concerned, taking into consideration that really it is the military that is the right hand of such an event that happened 11 years from 1972 to 1981. But this thing we have to remember, that there is no presidential order, executive order, proclamation, or decree that would allow the violation of human rights. As a matter of fact, the most clear example would have been what happened in February 1986, when the very position held by the President Ferdinand Marcos, was threatened by an overthrow from the people that were there gathered at EDSA, and the bombing of Malacanang, where he could have retaliated and bombed EDSA likewise, because it was a defense of the seat of power. But he did not. He offered his very honor, the honor of his position and his office, and has chosen to leave instead of retaliating or hitting back or doing anything harmful to the people at EDSA. There is also one incident, I think this has been written several times by the people who were there, and also some of them have already talked about it, as a matter of fact, when they said that when they were asking the President what they would do in the first night, when people were gathering around the building, where Secretary Enrile has written about this likewise. When they were there in that building, and there were some people already with them, and some people outside, and President Marcos asked, how many are there? Because already some of his generals were restless, and they wanted to launch an attack against Enrile and Ramos, considered as really staging a mutiny in the military grounds. And of course, it is every right of every military general to defend the seat of power, which is the office of the President. But then President Marcos asked, ilang ba tao andun? How many people are there? And so there was a rough estimate they made. Those people in the office of Enrile, who were there together with Ramos, the members of the military who also joined them, these were the RAM boys, Reform the Armed Forces movement, and then we also had some people outside trying to get in entrance to the building. And so they said that roughly there could be, just an estimate, there could be about 300 people there. And so the generals were saying, then we could just come in and attack that building and arrest Enrile and Ramos, and perhaps there could be some damage done to the building itself, or to some injury to the people who were there who would be resisting. There could be some people who could be injured because of the violence that would be undertaken to enter the premises. And Marcos did not agree. Marcos said, no, we shall not do this. And then there were those likewise, the military who were already assembled with their tanks. As a matter of fact, some of those tanks were moving in the highway and coming to storm, to attack the military camps where the so-called rebels were stationed. And I remember that there was one general who called up the study room of the president, President Marcos, and was asking the president, what do we do? Because we have now zeroed in with our tanks, and there will not be very heavy damage, but there will be some casualties and some injuries. And so they said, well, we are going to wait for instructions from the president. And there was a silent lull. There was a lull of several minutes. And so the general called again. So what do we do? What did the president say? And then the President Marcos aide-de-camp, and this is Colonel Aroisa, he returned to the phone and said, well, you have to wait. The president is still praying. And then finally, they called again and said, so what do we do? We're already positioned. And so the answer was, hold still. There will be no movement at all. And then on live television, shown nationwide, as a matter of fact, because I was there at the time, you had General Ver, actually, when there was a meeting of the military officers there after they arrested some of the rebels who already were there near the palace, and they were presented by President Marcos to the public. And after that, when they were already removed from the public view, there was this meeting that the president was having. It was actually an open public meeting. He was addressing the generals, and there was the media was there, both foreign and local media. They were gathered around the president. In fact, they were just seated on the floor, just about 1.5 meters away from him. And then you had General Ver. He got the microphone and told the president, Mr. President, we can already bomb, the military establishment. And Enrile and Ramos are there. We can, we have the ammunitions. We have we've already zeroed into the targets. And Marcos, at the top of his voice, and this was heard. This was broadcast nationwide. What did he say? No arms, no ammunitions, no shooting. I will not allow it. Or something to that effect, but even stronger words. I cannot quote it right now, but we were there. The media was there, foreign and local media. Nobody wrote about this. But that was the height of the greatness of the man. He refused to fire back, to attack, to disperse the crowd by any means whatsoever, because there were so many suggestions, water hose, tear gas, etc. At the at the expense or at the height of the fact that he was offering the seat of power precisely and leaving that seat of power just so long as there would not be anarchy or civil war. Because if he did anything that would cause violence, then there would be a strong retaliation, not from our people, because the people in EDSA were not armed. And the rebels in Ponce, Enrile, and Ramos, how many were they? 100 of them? But it is coming from the greatest power of the world at that time, the United States of America, who actually already bombed Malacanang twice. I mean, not twice, 2 bombs actually that they dropped in Malacanang, just to be able to give the message quite clearly. You have to cut and cut cleanly and leave. And that's exactly what happened. They crossed the Pasig River and rode the American helicopters, brought them to the Philippine-American Air Base in Clark, and from there in the early morning, they were brought to Guam, and from Guam to Honolulu. And there it was that I said, until his dying day. And so those were the events and the situation that actually President Ferdinand E. Marcos, the family, Mrs. Imelda Romualdez Marcos, and the rest of those that joined him in that exile in Honolulu. We remember this date of his death, and as his son said, walk tall and be proud, for you have sat on the feet of a man that was touched by God. We remember him in such a manner, and as we've said, he was the purity of our republic. That was Ferdinand Enrile Marcos. We commemorate his death not just with respect and not just with prayers, but also with great honor. For once upon a time, 1965, a man stood in front of us, took his oath of office, and told each and every one of us, we shall make our nation great again.